Good morning. The Senate race is really starting to heat up. At last check, there were 9 candidates vying for the seat held by Senator Joe Lieberman. And today we are joined by the frontrunner in fundraising and in the few polls taken so far, Congressman Chris Murphy. And Congressman Murphy, thanks for being on the program.
Great. Thanks for having me.
It's hard to believe this started 13 months ago. You announced in January of 2011. How's the campaign been going so far?
Well, you're right. It is crazy how early these races start these days, but it's going well. You know, my first, second, and third obligation is to represent the 5th congressional district, and so I spend the bulk of my days doing just that. I've got a lot of middle-class constituents in the 41 towns that I represent that are struggling, and they want a congressman who's fighting for them to try to bring back good manufacturing jobs to Connecticut to try to keep families afloat. And in the end, not only is that my primary obligation, but I hope it's probably the best advertisement that I can make for my Senate run. I think if I'm doing a good job listening to the people that I represent and fighting to change the way that Washington works while I'm down there, that ultimately the people of the rest of the state will see that. And I think that, you know, as you look at some of the early things that happened in the race for the Senate, where John Larson and Rosa DeLauro and Joe Courtney and Jim Himes endorsed my candidacy fairly early, I think that's because they've watched the work that I've done in Washington, and they were sure right from the get-go that I'd be the strongest voice for their constituents in the United States Senate. So we still have a ways to go. I mean, we're still sitting here in February of the election year. There's going to be plenty of time to debate the issues. Right now, my primary focus is still doing the job I got.
In your fundraising pleas and in your tweets and so forth, you seem to be focusing on Linda McMahon. Do you believe that she'll win the Republican primary and be the nominee this year?
She certainly seems like the front runner right now. I mean, just if you look at the polls and the amount of money she's raising. And frankly, I think that she's the candidate that we have to prepare for. She's exceptional in the sense that she brings unlimited amounts of money to the race, frankly, as much money as the state will tolerate, it seems. And so we have to be ready for her. I wish that money didn't matter as much as it does in politics, but the fact is she's made no secret that she's going to try to buy this seat. Now, Chris Shays may put up a very strong challenge, and so I don't dismiss his candidacy at all. It's just that the money that McMahon brings to the table, I think, is so exceptional that we have to be ready for it as a party.
Would you be able to, if you are the nominee, defeat Chris Shays and Linda McMahon if there's a three-way race and he runs as an independent?
Well, I think that's an interesting thing to think about. I haven't heard him talk about it, but I'll be ready for whatever race comes our way. You know, I think that I can make a strong case that if you look at the work I've done on behalf of my constituents of the 5th District, if you look at how I've tried to change the perception of what a member of Congress is. So, you know, when I come back home, I don't do my office hours at a town hall. I do them at the supermarket. I'm knocking on people's doors, whether it's an election year or not. In Washington, I'm not screaming at Republicans on the other side of the aisle. I'm heading up cross-party organizations to try to promote civility. I think I've changed the model of what a member of Congress looks like, and ultimately, I think that that will be a pitch that hopefully voters will listen to no matter who's on the ballot in November.
A year ago, some of your supporters were saying that they didn't think Susan Bysiewicz would last the year in their campaign, and here is a year later. She's in it. She's been attacking you in the campaign trail. When you go out there and you meet some supporters who are on the fence, how do you persuade them that you're the better candidate than, let's say, William Tong or Susan Bysiewicz? What's your argument?
Well, you know, my argument is really about me and what I've done. I don't spend a lot of time comparing myself against the other candidates. I talk to people about the job that I've done. I show them the work that I've done to bring manufacturing jobs back to my district, the fact that I've founded the Buy America caucus in Washington that's leading the conversation to say that when we send our taxpayer dollars to Washington, they should come back to create jobs in the United States. And I point to the success I've had in passing legislation. I show them an old factory in Waterbury that's being rehabbed as we speak with a $15 million grant that I won to bring hundreds of jobs back to that city. And ultimately, I do talk about electability. I do talk about the fact that, well, we've got to make sure that we elect somebody who's ready to do the job on day one. I think I'm that candidate. I also think we've got to elect somebody who has the resources and the political support to run a competitive campaign against Linda McMahon. And on that score, I think think we're right now the only candidacy that can match her dollar for dollar, volunteer for volunteer.
If Susan Bysiewicz was the nominee, do you think she could defeat Linda McMahon?
I hope that we could defeat Linda McMahon or Chris Shays with a Democrat. I would think it would be disastrous for this state if we elected someone like McMahon. In the end, though, I think we've got to be careful about making sure that we put up a candidate who has the resources to fight McMahon one-on-one. You know, a lot has been made of the fact that we've raised a lot of money. I think we've raised more money than all of the other candidates, Republican and Democrat, in the race combined. But really, what's, I think, important about that is how we've done it. I've raised $3.5 million, but from 5,000 different people. The average donation to our campaign is under $250, and we've had 10,000 people come onto the website and sign up to help. We're really putting together a grassroots campaign across this state, and I do think in the end, I hope any Democrat could win, but I think we've got to be very careful to make sure that we nominate a candidate that we're sure can win.
Mitt Romney's wealth has certainly been a water cooler topic during the presidential campaign this year, and part of his wealth as a result of some of the tax laws in our country, and Mrs. Bysiewicz was criticizing you for voting for what they now call the Romney Rule. The New York Times says in 2010 you were one of only 34 Democrats who supported this bill that would include a provision which would change the tax treatment of carried interest and so forth, allowing him to pay a lower rate. You could have, I think it passed by 11 votes. Do you regret that vote today?
No, I've voted over and over again to eliminate that loophole that essentially allows somebody like Mitt Romney to pay a 15% tax rate on the fees he charges to manage an investment rather than on actual capital gains. It's an egregious tax loophole. We should get rid of it, and the result would be additional billions of dollars into the Treasury. There's no question where I stand on that issue. Over and over again, I've voted to eliminate that loophole. That specific bill you're talking about is a much larger bill. The elimination of the tax loophole is just one piece of the bill. And of course, as everyone knows that has worked in and around government, there are often bills that you vote against even though you support pieces of them, just like there are bills that you vote for even though you oppose pieces of it. I support eliminating the tax loophole for carried interest. I've fought and advocated against it for years now, and my record is about, I think, as clear as can be.
There's a bill moving through the Senate right now that will go to the House that would ban insider trading by members of Congress. This was exposed by 60 Minutes last fall, and your boss, House Majority Leader Nancy Pelosi, was one of the big benefactors of this policy. Would you vote to get rid of this?
Not only would I vote to get rid of it, but this week I signed on the floor of the House of Representatives what's called a discharge petition. Speaker Boehner won't bring the bill right now before the House of Representatives, called the Stock Act. And so I joined with my colleagues on the House of Representatives to try to use a parliamentary maneuver to go around the Republican leader so that we can have an immediate vote on the Stock Act. It's egregious that any member of Congress could be using the information they get to buy stocks to try to gain an advantage over normal, average, everyday people out there. And this is something that I've cared about from the very beginning, Dennis. When I came to Congress in 2007, the way that we enforced our existing ethics rules in Congress was ludicrous. We basically put members of Congress in charge of enforcing our own rules, and there was a sort of, slap you on the back behind closed doors deal that said Republicans wouldn't investigate Democrats and Democrats wouldn't investigate Republicans. We ended that in my first term because I led a group of freshmen to set up the first ever citizens ethics panel. And so this to me is just a logical extension of the work that we did to clean up our ethics process. We should pass the Stock Act and do it quickly.
You mentioned this Buy American thing earlier in the program. Where do you draw the line? Because I know right after you came out with it last year, it came out that the chairwoman of the Democratic Party, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, drives a car made in Japan. Right. You go up to the state capitol, you see a lot of foreign cars. Some may have, are foreign brands assembled here. Others are completely foreign. And I know you brought up the 9/11 items that were made in China, but in the big scheme of things, that's a small amount. What do you think about the big ticket items that Americans are buying?
Well, listen, I'm not going to tell you that I don't have items in my house, right, that are made outside of the United States. The fact is that it's every individual's decision where they buy things from, but when the federal government, using our taxpayer dollars, is purchasing things, they should purchase them from American companies. We should have a preference at the federal government to spend money on American companies, and it's not happening today. And listen, I've been willing to take on the Bush administration on this and the Obama administration. President Obama has not been strong enough on making sure that when taxpayer dollars go into the federal treasury, they get spent here. And this example over 9/11 bracelets, it's a small one, but it's indicative of the bigger problem. $17,000 is not a lot of money, but the fact that our 9/11 commemorative bracelets are being made outside of the United States when there were 4 companies here that could have made them, I think that's clearly on one side of the line. And well, I think that we all should think about where we buy products from, and I think that we should try as consumers to give a preference to American companies, as I do. Ultimately, the federal government absolutely should be supporting jobs. We could create 600,000 jobs here in this country, Dennis, if we just cleaned up the loopholes in the Buy America law. That's thousands, tens of thousands of jobs right here in Connecticut, and we need them.
Just recently, President Obama introduced a mandate that would require Catholic hospitals and other organizations, Fairfield University, St. Joseph College and so forth, St. Francis Hospital, it would make these organizations provide contraception through their health care plans to employees. And of course, the archbishops are enraged. They don't want to do this. Where do you stand on this?
I think that the rule has to apply to everyone. And I certainly understand the sensitivities brought to this debate by the Catholic Church. But the loophole that they want is one that you could drive a Mack truck through. It could be used not only by Catholic hospitals, but by any employer or any affiliate of a religious organization that has a moral objection to a particular piece of a healthcare mandate. The fact is that to me, women, no matter where they work, should have access to contraception. And we've had that rule on the books here in Connecticut with the so-called pill bill since 1999. And I think it's a smart rule across the country. We're seeing a war being waged right now in Washington on women's rights, whether it's the attempts to peel back Roe versus Wade or the recent attempts to try to end funding for contraception across this country. We've got to draw a line in the sand here and say enough is enough. A woman, wherever she works, has a right to a full range of reproductive health care. That should be the law of the land.
So Archbishop Mansell, who's essentially the CEO of this, Catholic organizations in the state, your message to him is that he cannot be a conscientious objector about it. He needs to go with the program?
Well, and just as we did with access to emergency contraception, we said that hospitals, whether you are a secular hospital or a religious hospital, have to give the full range of access to emergency contraception. We consistently have applied healthcare standards to institutions regardless of their secular or religious affiliation. I completely understand where the Archbishop is coming from here, but ultimately we have to have the same rules for employees of any institution in the state.
Is there room for compromise?
I think this is a tough one to compromise on because I think it's difficult in the end to form a rule that is not an exception that ultimately comes bigger than what you intended. I'm certainly willing at any moment to sit down and try to figure out a compromise that is acceptable to both sides. On this one, though, to be honest, Dennis, I haven't seen one that couldn't be at some point blown a little bit too far wide open.
The unemployment rate is now at 8.3%. The last 3 presidents who were up for re-election with a number near that figure at this stage of the campaign, Jimmy Carter, first President Bush, and Gerald Ford, of course, all were defeated, and the unemployment figures were lower than they are today. What is your argument to voters out there who say that President Obama has made the economy worse?
Well, the president inherited an economy that was melting down as he took office, and we were facing a depression like we haven't seen in over a generation. What he did, I think, was fairly heroic. He stabilized an economy, and he has gone about the business of slowly but consistently adding jobs back 6 months straight of declines in the unemployment rate. And he's done it with a Congress run by the Republicans of the House of Representatives who will not cooperate with him. And I think the fundamental question in this campaign is going to be, whether it's at the presidential level or in this race for the U.S. Senate, is do you want to continue on this path to recovery, or do you want to essentially go back to the exact set of policies that set us into economic catastrophe in the first place, because Mitt Romney or Linda McMahon or Chris Shays are all offering the same policies that led to this disaster: less regulation of Wall Street, lower tax rates for millionaires, and a gap between the haves and the have-nots that is unsustainable. I think that's a fight ultimately that the president can win and the Democrats can win.
We're running out of time, so one final question. It is, of course, Super Bowl Sunday. Who are you rooting for today, Giants or Patriots?
I'm rooting for the Giants. I think Bradshaw's going to go for 100 yards. Eli's going to hold on to the ball. It's going to be a close game in the end, but we're hot, and I'm going to be glued to the TV.
Congressman Chris Murphy, thank you very much for being on the program.